So I'm a big believer, in fate, I guess, but also in you have to grab every opportunity that gets given you in life, because you never know when the next opportunity will come along. And I came home and my husband was in like the hot tub. You could see the Hollywood sign, and he looked at me and he was like, "Where did it all go wrong?"
Hello and welcome again to another episode of the Talking Salford podcast, where we shine a light on the fantastic lives of those who have previously called the University of Salford home. We're doing another home recording this time, but don't worry, you can still catch us on camera if you prefer to watch us via YouTube. And I'm very excited to introduce a really talented guest for this episode who has gone from Peel Park to scaling the heights of the Hollywood Hills during her career. A warm Talking Salford welcome to Kelly Phillips. Kelly, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. That's very lovely intro. But yeah, I'm good, thank you. Slight sore throat at the moment, so excuse my croaky voice, but very happy to join you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. So Kelly's Salford story starts in 1996, when she arrived at the age of 21 to study accounting after a number of years living in the Canary Islands. Kelly always wanted to get into television and film, and maths was proven to be her strongest subject, so she eyed a career in the area of production finance. The day after her last exam as a third year in 1999, she got a call inviting her to set as an assistant production accountant in Devon. It was from there that Kelly slowly built up her portfolio of work, working on productions across Bristol and London, while still maintaining her base in Manchester. Kelly rose through the ranks of productions. Kelly rose through the ranks of production finance while she worked on a number of TV and film shows, including the likes of Black Mirror, Spooks, Hustle, Broadchurch, and The Tunnel. Her involvement with Black Mirror's third season as a financial controller proved life-changing, as Netflix then asked her to come aboard as a finance executive in 2017, and she moved out to work in Los Angeles for some time. She's quickly risen through the ranks of one of the world's biggest streamers and is joining us from London this afternoon, but most weeks you'd find her travelling around the world in her role as Netflix's head of studio finance for the UK, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So, Kelly, let's start with the beginning then. So, let's talk about your love of TV and film, as that's the industry you now work in. What were the earliest films that you can remember watching as a child?
I didn't probably go back as far as a child, but some of the films that really stand out to me, there was a film, I don't know if anyone knows it, called Pretty in Pink, which was a Molly Ringwald film. I was obsessed by that. I must have seen that film about 20 times. When I was really young, my mum and dad are very fond of telling me I was obsessed by Grease.
Yeah.
So loved that film, still love it actually. I can still watch that film. And then other films that I remember because I watched them again and again are Dirty Dancing, Pretty Woman. All those kind of films were pretty iconic, I think, from my childhood. I remember them very well.
Were there any kind of favourites looking back then that made you think about working in the film industry?
No, I don't think I ever even considered that, to be honest, when I was younger. I think it was only as I got older and started working more in the finance world that you start thinking about, oh, what do I want to do? And, and could I? But I guess that's kind of one of those things that you just don't think of it as an industry when you're young. And that's kind of the thing that we want to change.
Yeah, absolutely. So because you had family that worked in the industry, before deciding to go down that path, did you get the chance to visit any sets as a kid or as a teenager growing up?
My uncle worked in as a driver. I did actually go to a set, but only because I lived in Peterborough at the time, and there was Stamford, which is quite close to Peterborough, is very period. It's a beautiful town. And they were filming Middlemarch there, and they were asking for extras. And my sister actually went to be an extra. So I did go and went with her. So kind of watched her being an extra. So watched a bit of filming. So that was really interesting. But again, it wasn't it's still at that point wasn't on my radar to like, oh, there's a link between maybe what I would want to do and moving into that, because I was never very good at acting or any of the creative arts, shall we say. So it was never something I thought of when I was younger.
So let's talk about the time when you arrived in Salford then. I mean, so you arrived here in 1996. That's the same year as the IRA bombing in Manchester City Centre. So what was Manchester and Salford like to be in as a student at the time?
I mean, very different to today. Definitely not as many swanky apartments, and some of the areas that are now very lovely were very different back then. But I loved Manchester, I have to say. It was the first city that I'd ever lived in. So my mum and dad, when I was younger, I lived in Peterborough. So it is a city, but not a big city. And I took one thing that was so stood out straight away was that kind of northern hospitality. Like everyone was so friendly, and that really stood out to me.
Mhm.
So I fell in love with Manchester straight away, and I actually stayed in Manchester, kept a place until 2014. I only actually left. I loved the north. I only left for love actually when I met my husband. So that was the reason that I eventually sold my place up there and moved wholeheartedly down to Surrey.
What are the key memories that jump out from that time at Salford that you had as a student? Is there anything that kind of rings any bells from your studies or just from your life in the city?
Well, I remember, which is not related to studying, but Manchester United won the treble.
Yeah,
And Man City,
99.
I had friends that I knew from Gran Canaria who were from Manchester, and he was a huge Man City fan. And City were way lower in the divisions then, and they got promoted. So I remember like this double celebration in Manchester, and I remember the whole city being out, and it just being this amazing feeling of being part of like this huge celebration, because the whole city was celebrating together, it felt like. So that was a memory that really stood out to me.
Mhm.
And I just remember generally just having a really great time there, meeting great friends, many of which I've still got in my life. Yeah, just generally a feeling of, and actually, sorry, just to add to that, also a feeling of regeneration in the
Yeah.
time that I lived there, just seeing the city grow, and they built the Selfridges and Harvey Nichols, and you got all these new restaurants opening, and just seeing the city developing into the great city it is now. It was exciting to see that come along.
No, it must have been absolutely, and that regeneration has still come through today. Really, over the last few decades, it continues to regenerate itself. Manchester. So why accounting for a degree?
So I'd already decided I wanted to be an accountant. So originally, I finished my A levels and went straight to work for a practice firm in Peterborough, where I was living at the time. And quickly realized that this was not something I wanted to do forever. I didn't, it wasn't exciting. And so at that point, I decided that I wanted to go back to uni to go and get my degree and have a look at other options in finance. I by then knew about production accounting, but I didn't know how easy it would be to get into. So when I'd done my work shadowing during my A levels, I'd Thomas Cook is a huge was a huge the headquarters were in Peterborough. So I did my work shadowing there in the accounts department. It was actually in the audit department, and they were talking to me about international audit. So you get to travel all over the world doing audits. So at that point, I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to uni, do a degree, do my ACCA because that's a internationally recognized qualification,
Hmm.
and then I've got options. If I can't get into TV and film, then I'm going to look at doing something that enables me to travel the world. So, so I already knew I was always good at maths. I always knew that that was what I wanted to do in my career. So that's the reason that I decided to go to Salford. And Salford actually was one of the only universities that offered a course that had exemptions from ACCA.
Okay.
I think I looked at Brighton and Salford, and I visited both, and I just loved the vibe of Manchester. You
Hmm.
know, being in a big city. I had friends anyway that I'd lived with in the Canary Islands that had moved back to Manchester, and so I fell in, as I said to you, I fell in love with the city. So I chose Salford. So both for the city and for the course that they offered.
So when you say the ACC exemption, for those that don't know, what is that about then? Why was that such a big factor?
Well, so I could have done my degree or diploma or something like that, and then I would then have to do my exams, my ACCA. So there's at the time there was you did your foundation, which your certificate, and then your professional. So what the course that Salford offered gave you exemptions provided you passed at a certain level from foundation and certificate stages. And then my professional stage, I could then study. And actually, Salford also did you could do your professional exams full time at Salford as a
Wow.
professional course. So I did my diploma and I got those exemptions, and then I stayed on. Obviously, that was all paid for because it was professional studies, and I got a loan to stay on rather than going to work to do it, and did my professional study exams for a
Yeah.
year at Salford as well. So
So are they usually exams you have to do after graduation then?
you would have, yes, some of them
Yeah.
would be, yes. Um, and so the idea was, okay, so I've done all those, and then now I can decide, then I could start looking at what the opportunities would be available, but I wouldn't have to work and study at the same time, which a lot of people do, and which I would have done when when I finished my A levels, if I'd have continued in practice.
I see. Okay. So yeah, a big factor then.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
So you've been to the campus in the last year. How does it compare to how it was in the late 90s?
So there's new buildings.
Yeah.
I think it's I mean generally from the road it doesn't look too dissimilar, but when you walk through the campus it's
Yeah.
much nicer. There's new buildings, and I would also say it used to be when you used to walk from the university into Manchester, there wasn't a lot around there, or it was
Hmm.
very different
Yeah.
feel than it is now. So it was interesting because when I came up to do the talk to the accounting students a couple of months ago, there was an issue on the road. So we ended up walking back to Manchester. I was surprised, like, oh, we stopped and had a tapas bar along the way. So it was just very different. But as I say, but still, great memories and a great campus still.
Yeah, that the regeneration of Chapel Street is one of Salford's big success stories.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you got to experience that. So you got your first break in the industry immediately after finishing here. So tell me about that story. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's one of those things that you think, oh God, it was that sliding doors moment. I had a
Hmm.
choice. It was literally the day after my last exam in the professional exams. And so I hadn't actually been out for 6 weeks because the exams were so hard. I'd been in and studying solidly for 6 weeks, hadn't
Okay.
seen anybody. I was so excited to finish. And I had planned to go to Spain for the summer. At the time, my mom and dad lived in Spain.
Hmm.
So I was like, finished exams, go and have a couple of months off, and then focus on what I want to do. And then I got a phone call. My uncle was working as a driver on a show called Down to Earth, and the accountant had unfortunately parted ways with his assistant. And he just happened to be talking to my uncle and mentioned it. So it's just like one of those moments. And my uncle said, oh, my niece has just finished her accountancy exams. She's always said she'd like to work in the industry. And he said, okay, give her my number, tell her to call me. She has to call me today. So he called me. I called him straight away. He gave me a phone interview and then said, "I'll give you a trial for a month. You need to start tomorrow."
Wow.
So I literally had that decision, which actually didn't even feel like a decision. So I I packed up my little Fiat Uno, which I had at the time, cancelled all my plans, to go away for the summer. And the next morning, I drove to Devon and started my job as a assistant accountant or trainee assistant accountant on my first TV job.
That's crazy that it happened so quickly after graduation, but that is this industry, isn't it? It's you get the call, you get an opportunity, you've got to take it. Has that been your experience over the years?
Absolutely. I think, if I hadn't taken that opportunity, I may never have had another one. So I just felt I just had to go for it. And actually that accountant, he kept me as his assistant for over 2 years. So he took me from job to job to job and trained me up until I was ready. And I got my first job as a production accountant. So he was also very nurturing with me. So it was like right place, right time. So I'm a big believer, in fate, I guess, but also in you have to grab every opportunity that gets given you in life
Mhm.
because you never know when the next opportunity will come along. So yeah, I was, and sometimes you have to just sacrifice things. You have to make sacrifices. So I don't think I ever took a summer off after that. Um, but I was so happy that I did it because it gave me the career that I've had for my life, and
Yeah.
it's been fantastic.
How were the first few jobs? Because obviously this is something you wanted to do, but did it really feel quite early on that this is my career now? I'm happy with this.
Yeah, I mean, I loved it straight away. It was a bit scary, going down. It was halfway through the job, so everybody had formed relationships, but
Hmm.
everybody was so friendly and helpful. Um, but you don't know anything. I mean, the names in the TV and film industry, like a grip, a best boy, I was like, I have no idea what all of these
Yeah.
are. So it was really, thrown in at the deep end, especially because they were filming already. So it wasn't like you got the prep where usually it's a little bit easier. Um, but it was an amazing experience. I knew straight away. I enjoyed it. I mean, we worked long hours, but I didn't mind. The positive thing about that show was we were all away on location, so you really got to know each other well.
Yeah.
And everyone was so welcoming. And actually, one of my best friends I met on that very first show, and we still see each other all the time now. So it shows how closely you work together on those shows. But I knew straight away that I wanted to keep doing it and that I would work as hard as I could to ensure that I kept working in the industry.
Yeah. No, I hear you. So you've ended up working on jobs both in TV and film, but what have been some of your more favorite jobs over the years?
Um, I would say, I mean, I've loved all of them in different ways.
Hmm.
Sometimes the hardest ones have been the most successful ones. There was a show though that stands out called Funland, which actually in Manchester. I think it
Okay.
was most of my early career was in London, and I really wanted to come back to Manchester. In fact, so much so that when I got offered the production accountant role by the BBC, which I took, they asked me to become staff, and one of my bargaining tools was yes, if I can get some work in Manchester.
I see.
So then Funland came along, which was in a comedy drama, and that was in Manchester. So they let me go and be the accountant on that. So I got to come back to Manchester, and it was such an amazing show. It was just such fun. It was one of those shows when I look back, and it seemed always to be sunny. We just had the most amazing summer. We did 1 week a block in Blackpool in the pleasure beach.
No,
So
okay.
it was, and we did night shoots. It was just the whole crew were amazing, and we just had such great fun. Um, that show stood out for me. And then probably another one, as you mentioned earlier, was Black Mirror.
Black Mirror.
And that was more, I think, it was really different.
Hmm.
It was shooting all over the world, which I loved. So it was a great learning experience. Having different, weren't just units. It was like shooting different smaller films consecutively with
Yeah.
totally different crews, learning all different incentives. It was great. And of course, that was my introduction to Netflix as well. So that was really that was really great. And again, it was a show that I wasn't meant to be doing. I got offered it. I was kind of waiting for another show to go, and I decided to take the risk. And so it just shows like an opportunity comes. Do you want to take it? And then you do, and then it leads to other opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, can you talk to me a little bit about the differences between working on, say, a TV show here in the UK or working on a film set in production finance? What's the big differences for you guys?
I don't think there are as many differences now. I think it's really about budget size.
Hmm.
So if you can work on a huge series now, which wasn't so much the case back then. Back then, TV shows tended to be the smaller shows, so there would be like an accounting team of two, um, whereas the big films might have been like 10. So in film then, and to an extent now, but also the bigger series, you tend to have a job. So for an accounts team on a big film, there'll be somebody that does petty cash, somebody that does P cards, somebody that does AP. You're very specific in your role.
Hmm.
Whereas then there was the accountant and there was the assistant. So I did all of those things. Um, and so it depends on really the budget size to how specialized you get and the size of the teams that you work with.
So the bigger the budget for, say, a film, the bigger the size of the crew, the more assets that you've got on the move, and more locations I imagine that you've got to get to around where you're going. But how does it compare actually when you're in a filming on a studio, like to filming on location?
Um, I mean, you just move when you're on location, obviously, you're moving around a lot. So
Yeah.
every day you're kind of somewhere different. Whereas on stages, you're much, you're static. You tend to shoot more on a stage because you're
Hmm.
all in one place. I think it's nice to have, I always liked to have a balance. So it depends, it also depends location work where you're just out on location but within but within a certain distance of your base versus location work where the whole crew are away together.
Yeah.
And I think it, the times when you all work away together on location, you're all staying away, that's when you really get to know everybody and
Okay.
kind of bond as a team.
I've got you. I've got you. So let's talk about Netflix then. So you moved to one of the biggest streaming giants at the time, still is one of the biggest streaming giants. So talk to me about how you felt about making that move to LA and what was life like once you arrived.
It was funny because I got an email after attending a networking session, a networking event. Again, just talking about taking opportunities. I was very tired. I'd done a 12-hour day, and the event was on the evening. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to go. I'm tired. And I called my husband, or my boyfriend at the time, and he said, "You always tell me that you should always take opportunities.
Hmm.
You've been invited to this networking event, it's Netflix." So I kind of was like, yeah, you're right. So I went. And when I woke up the next morning, I got an email saying, would you consider moving to LA? So it just shows if I hadn't gone, would I have met those people? Would we have had would I ever have met them? Would the opportunity have gone to someone else? So, and at the time, my immediate reaction was, no, we're really happy. I've got a great career. And my husband was like, just say yes, and then just let's see, like,
Hmm.
see what opportunities there are. So, but obviously, I won't go through all the details and the time span, but obviously, eventually, I did get the role,
Hmm.
and we did move to LA, and it was scary moving away away from all your friends and family, starting a whole new life because it was going to be forever. Was scary, but also really exciting. Um, I do think it made it slightly easier having a partner to go with. I think going on your own
Okay.
would have been super scary, but it was good. But we embraced it. When we got there, we just drunk it all in and made sure
Mm.
that we made the most of our time there. Um, so it was great, but it was definitely hard to start with learning a whole new, everything's different in the US. They have different union rules, and so there was a lot to learn. And having when you become financial controller and you kind of become an expert in your field, to then move somewhere else and be learning again
Yeah.
is it's difficult. I remember coming home every night and my head feeling so full of information. It felt like being back at school. Um, but then it was also amazing. There was a moment that I always remember. That we were staying in a like apartment hotel while we found accommodation, and I came home and my husband was in like the hot tub. It was you could see the Hollywood sign, and he looked at me and he was like, "Where did it all go wrong?" And and I laughed, but it was just one of those moments where you sort of think, wow, like I can't believe we're actually here in Hollywood, and our office overlooked the Hollywood sign. So
Yeah.
there were those moments when I was, oh, this is really hard. And then you look outside and you think, what an opportunity, and how many people get to do this. So I just remind myself how lucky I am every day.
It sounds like an amazing opportunity. So how did you deal with the 8 hour time difference? I always think that when it comes to people that have got family over in that part of the West Coast, it's hard, right?
It is hard. And also a lot of the shows I was covering were here
Mm.
in Europe. Um, so you get used to getting up very early. So I became, I was the first one in the office for sure. And I had to speak to friends and family in the mornings,
Yeah.
which was, you do get into a routine, but it's also difficult if you're ever feeling low or something happens to somebody. Um, Not being able to just pick up the phone no matter what time of day.
Mhm.
If you've had a bad day at work or you're just feeling like you need to talk to somebody and everyone's in bed. So the 8 hour time zone was tricky, but you learn to work around it and have like windows of when you're going to call people that, your family and friends, etc.
Yeah. What were some of the big cultural shocks about going from London to LA?
Um, Culture shocks. Well, my husband's very into sport, so
Yeah.
he was very upset about not being able to watch at a reasonable time.
Yeah.
I think the main thing was just going and not having an established circle of friends.
Yeah. Okay.
Just really being starting again on our own.
Mhm.
But we had only just got married, so actually it was a great first year of marriage in that we really bonded that year because it was just us. Um, but apart from that, I mean, I don't think there was like any huge, oh gosh, this is really different,
Mm.
or I think we just embraced it.
Yeah.
It was
Absolutely.
it was an amazing opportunity, and I hadn't been there that long, like a couple of months, when we started discussing opening an office in London. So once those discussions started, I definitely could see that there was potential that I would be moving back. So I think we really embraced everything about being in
Yeah.
LA, and making sure we maximized, our weekends and visited as much of California as we could.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you about opportunities in the industry. So some research from the Association of Accounting Technicians found in a survey of school leavers that just 4% think finance skills are essential to the film TV industry, despite a record 6.72 billion being spent on production in the UK last year. There's a massive disparity in those figures. So why do you think there is this lack of awareness of a career in finance production here in the UK?
Do you know what? I don't know, and that's definitely something we need to address. I think maybe people don't realize the opportunities, so that's like education. So we just need to do a better job of educating. And also, I think people think it's going to be really difficult to get into the industry.
Yeah,
So both of those kind of pieces are education. I would say finance is like integral to TV and film production. Everything has budgets, everything needs managing, the crew need paying. There's so much of the industry needs finance teams, and that's in the production finance space, which is what we've been talking about, but also in the studio space. So content accounting, FP&A. There's so many roles that are finance based, both on productions and in studios. So
Mm.
if anybody is listening who thinks that it's not a career choice, it really is. And, we need more people to come into the industry.
Yeah. Do you feel like, well, you would know this, but is there a skill shortage in this position in both North America and the UK, I suppose, with the amount of money that's been spent on productions?
Yeah, absolutely, there is. And there's a lot of industry bodies that are looking at how we can bring more people in. And, one of the reasons for this has been that there has been a boom. Shows have got bigger and more complicated. So
Hmm.
team sizes are bigger. But in addition to team sizes being bigger, there's more productions being made as well. The UK is very, very busy and has been for the last, couple of years, 5, 10 years, maybe even longer. And so we definitely need more people in the finance teams. And it's interesting that I would say in my career, there's a good portion of people that work in production finance that don't come from finance backgrounds, as in they haven't done AAT or an accounting degree, etc. But they've wanted to get into TV and film, and they've got in and they've maybe had an aptitude for finance and moved in. So
Hmm.
if you do have an accounting background, there's so many roles for you. So we should be encouraging more and educating more of opportunities to get into the industry.
How do you think studios and the industry can go about raising more awareness of a career in this field?
There's a lot of work already happening. I know that I came and spoke to the university. I have many
Yeah.
colleagues that do the same. The Production Guild of Great Britain, they do a lot of work in this realm as well. Screen Skills, which is they do a variety of work across all of the different spheres in production, but they do have ways that you can, on their website, if you go on, they talk about how you can get into the industry, but including production accounting.
Okay.
So I know that there's a lot of work going on in that way, careers fairs, how we get in at careers fairs. So there is work going on, but obviously there's a lot of work still to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how would you recommend that someone gets started in? How do people get started in finance production? What's the best way in?
I would say to check like your local screen film alliances. So Manchester, if you're in Manchester, you can check with Screen Manchester. Also, Production Guild of Great Britain and Screen Skills. They're three really great places just to look for what's happening, any courses that are coming up. I mean, we run a course for Netflix via the Production Guild, and we do that twice a year. So we bring in, I think we've had over 40 people we've brought in so far, and many of
Okay.
them are still working within the industry. So there are, and ITV do some, BBC. There's lots of different studios and broadcasters run training programs, and so there are many opportunities to get into the industry. So definitely have a look at industry bodies, look at what's happening locally, and look for opportunities.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Kelly. So let's talk about the future of the streaming industry. How do you see things changing over the coming 5 years? Are we at the peak of streaming content? Do you feel, or do you think that it's starting to plateau out because there's just so much content being made at one time now?
I mean, who knows? I think it depends on how we absorb the content, and as the generations come through, what people are watching, how much they watch changes. So it really depends on demand, because that's
Hmm.
essentially what it's about. I think at Netflix, we're focused on making the best content possible.
Yeah.
So, to make sure that you want to be a subscriber. So I think there's always has been, and there always will be, a strong demand for entertainment. I don't really see that changing. And entertainment obviously comes in many different ways. So, what I will say is, talking about actual production, we definitely hit a huge production boom after COVID. So
Yeah.
I know there was a lot in the press about it. But we had a backlog of all the shows that would have been produced in COVID, and then all the shows that were ready to go. So it did create a kind of bottleneck of shows, and it was very, very busy. So it isn't, it did ease off, but I do think it was because of that COVID backlog of shows. But
Yeah.
I think, I think everybody is still, well, we're still producing in the UK, BBC, everybody's still producing. So I think it's a really great industry to get into.
Uh, so let's do some hot takes. So these are short, quick fire questions to round things off today. So interested to know for your answer for this one. So what's been your favorite Netflix film or TV show from this year?
Oh, I've got a few.
Okay.
Um, I'm loving At Home with the Furies at the moment, I have to
Okay. Yeah.
say. I am loving that. But I like uplifting shows. So
Hmm.
funny, uplifting tend to be my thing. So I loved Bank of Dave. I don't know if you saw that. That was a
Yes. Yes. Bank of Dave. Absolutely.
Oh my God, I
Very
love
wholesome.
that. Heartstopper, I love. Wham, I loved. And Love is Blind, I'm a sucker for dating shows. So yeah, there are a few of my favourites from this year.
That's it. That's a good collection there. So, second question: would you rather work on a TV show or a big budget feature film?
I am going to have to say TV because like TV is where I started, and so if I had to choose, but I love both, it's
Yeah.
probably TV because it's where I started.
Okay. And what would be your best bit of advice be for an accountant student in 2023?
I would say work hard because it's going to be worth it. Your exams only last for a little bit of time, and I know it's at the time it feels like it's all encompassing, but you'll reap the rewards later. And definitely consider this as an industry. It's given me such an amazing career so far and so many amazing experiences. So it's definitely something to consider. And finally, I would say grab every opportunity that comes up because you never know where it's going to lead. So make sure that you maximize opportunities when they come along.
Some great advice there, Kelly. Thank you so much for coming on to see us today. It's been lovely having you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's been our pleasure, and that brings an end to today's episode of Talking Salford. So, if you like what you hear, please do subscribe or keep watching the videos on YouTube. It's great to see the audience growing as we continue, and we'll see you next time.